Call the meeting to order, please. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, August 15th, 2013. The time is 7 o'clock. Visitors and residents are always welcome at all of our meetings. If you would like to address the board for any reason whatsoever, I just ask that you be recognized by me and make your comments from the podium so that the folks at home can hear you. And with that, I would ask the village clerk to please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Sussman.
Here.
Trustee Pollak.
Here.
Trustee Hamilton.
Here.
Trustee Ballerine.
Here.
Trustee Collins.
Here.
Village Manager Scalera.
Here.
Village Attorney Molina.
Here.
Village Attorney Mars.
Here.
Also present, Village Clerk Kathy Haley. Absent this evening, Trustee Michael Foley.
Thank you very much. We have a quorum. If you'll please rise and join us for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First up this evening is presentations and public comment. We do have a sad note on which to begin our meeting tonight. We are going to pause for a few minutes here to honor one of our former trustees, Mark Lees, who died just recently. And I've asked former President Jack Wyaduck, who was a friend of Mr. Lees, if he would please come and say a few words about it. Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, honorable trustees. It's always a pleasure to be here. See you all dressed so nicely. I didn't know you put these lights up just for me, but it is a pleasure to be here, albeit on a sort of a somber occasion. I'm here to talk tonight just for a few minutes about a gentleman by the name of Mark J. Lees, who passed away last week. I'm not certain that there's too many people in the room that might have known him. Rich Ray, I think, might fall into that category, along with myself. But Mr. Lees was a village trustee, and he served under Mr. Mexto, who was about 5 back there in the 70s and very early 80s. And it's interesting. I went to his. I know his family. I've known his family for many years. And I went to his wake, and I went to his funeral, and I listened to his eulogy. And I was, which was, by the way, which was delivered by his son, Mark A. Lees II, who was not a junior, but he's Mark A. Lees II. And I was struck on that occasion by some of the things that were said about him, and it called to my mind a book that, and a writer that most of you probably have looked at some time in the last few years. It was Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation. Because Mark J. Lees was one of those last members of the greatest generation. Franklin Roosevelt said about this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. Now, when did the Great Generation occur? It basically was the generation of people who were born just after World War I. So we're talking about a period when this occurred, about 1919 through about 1940, basically 42, something like that. And it was an interesting time in our country. It was a very interesting time in our country. It was an interesting time in Riverside, too. It was in about 1900, early 1900s, there were only 1,500 people in Riverside. Hard to conceive of that, really. But by 1940, there were almost 8,000 people in Riverside. So this obviously was a period of great growth and to some extent, prosperity. But I'd like to, if I could, call on Mr. Brokaw to help me set the stage of this, because like our own times, where we've seen tremendous successes and then balloons burst and great problems occur, that's sort of what the people who were this greatest generation really came to deal with. As the 1920s began, it was a time of national promise, optimism, and prosperity when all things seemed possible, as the United States was swiftly taking its place as the most powerful nation in the world. World War I was over. America's industrial might was coming of age with the rise of the auto industry and the nascent communications industry. Wall Street was booming, and the popular culture was rich with the likes of Babe Ruth, Eugene O'Neill, D.W. Griffith, and a new author on the scene, F. Scott Fitzgerald. What those unsuspecting infants could not have realized, of course, was that these were temporary conditions, a false spring to a life that would be buffeted by the winds of change, dangerous and unpredictable, so fierce that they threatened not just America, but the very future of the planet. And this was the time that Mark Lease entered the world here in Riverside. It's interesting to note also that when Mark Lease was born in 1921, he was already a fourth-generation Riversider. In 1921, he was a fourth-generation Riversider. I scratched my head on that one. I couldn't figure out how that happened. And for those of you who are familiar with the earliest history of Riverside, you heard tell of the so-called Creedon Farm, which is a big farmhouse that's still located there. It's Jim Jodawane and his wife are the current owners. And it was there that an early settler by the name of Patrick Ronan settled and established a farm and a dairy. And it was his daughter who in the 1890s married the first Mark Lease, Mark A. Lease. And Mark A. Lease was an interesting individual also. Because if you again know some of the early history of Riverside, you'll recall that we had a livery here in town. That was Mark A. Lease. He ran the livery. It's over in the arcade building and just a little bit of the Quincy Street. He was also the telegrapher for the Burlington Northern Railroad. And Mark A. Lease settled with his wife on Lawton Road. Subsequently, his son was born, the first Mark J. Lease. And he too settled in Riverside, also on Lawton Road. I'm surprised that Lawton Road hasn't been renamed Lease Way as a result, but nevertheless, this occurred. And so, enter now the new Mark Lease. He's growing up here in the 20s when it was, I guess, great times and things were good. But, you know, by the time somebody was about 10 years of age, so that would take him to about 1930, his early prospects could have been shattered because there were problems all over. The stock market crashed. The damage was great. Income fell. 1,300 banks closed at that time. Businesses were failing everywhere. Millions of people ended up being out of work and with no safety net. The average family farm had an annual cash income of only $400. I mean, most of us are walking around with more of that just to buy a bag of groceries today. So it was an interesting time. Now, by the time Mark Lease was ending, getting to almost his majority, again, the world was in turmoil. And the war was everywhere. Hitler seized Austria. The Japanese continued their war against the Chinese. Stalin was presiding over trials and eliminating his rivals. The Spanish Civil War was going on, so on and so forth. And here we got a young man who's going into college. He was the valedictorian of his class at St. Ignatius, and he went to Notre Dame of all places, which is kind of surprising because, again, historically in Riverside, if you go back into the 20s and the 30s, sort of like when they used to hang the signs out in Boston, the Irish aren't welcome. Well, Catholics weren't highly regarded in those days. And I mention that only because, you know, again, it's a tremendous change historically for our community and everything. Finally, the war started, and Mark was in college, and he asked his dad if he could sign up, you know, like everybody was doing after Pearl Harbor. And his dad said, no, I want you to stay in college and finish up. So he did, and he graduated from Notre Dame in '43, and in 1943 he immediately joined the Navy on graduation, and he was sent to the Pacific after, you know, 90 days of training. He was a 90-day wonder. He was an officer, and he was a gunnery officer on a destroyer. And he found himself at the end of the war at Okinawa. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is what really struck me about this, because if you've read this book about the greatest generation, it's basically about ordinary people coming to the service of their country and then going back and fading back into the woodwork, so to speak. And that's sort of what this is all about. But getting back to Okinawa for just a minute, because this is an exciting thing. He found himself on the in a battle, and for those of you who are familiar with World War II history, you know at the end of the war the Japanese employed the kamikaze, and his ship was hit by a kamikaze. And he has related the story that as that plane came in, he was eyeball to eyeball with the pilot. He was blown off the ship. The only thing he came out, when he was pulled out of the water, the only thing he had on was his navy buckle and his trousers covered with oil. And again, strange thing, the guy who rescued him was his roommate from Notre Dame on another ship. Talk about an odd story, but nevertheless, it's true. So Mark comes back to Riverside, and early in the 40s, he married, has a family, has 5 children, gets involved in business. As his obituary points out, he was a CPA. He eventually became the treasurer and chief financial officer of Hart, Schaffner and Mark, raised his family here. He had 5 children, 4 boys and a girl. In fact, the girl still lives here, Josephine Lee Doherty. And she followed in her father's footsteps, serving the village, and she was the village clerk in, I believe, 1997 or 1998, something like that, for 2 years. And I guess, and as I pointed out, Mark did himself serve 2 terms as trustees during, the late 70s and the early 80s. He was an incredible man. He was just like any of your neighbors here. He didn't talk about all these things we talked about. He just did his job. He served his family. He served his community. He served his country. He encouraged his children and his grandchildren. He leaves a large family, many grandchildren, actually some great-grandchildren. It was a privilege for me to know him. He was both a friend and a neighbor, but in some ways he was also a mentor. And I share that with you because, you know, what most of us don't have a lot in common with him. He's of a generation way before us. Most of our parents, I guess, might have been in that generation. But one thing we do have in common is our service to the village and how important it was. And he did think it was important. And I will tell you that in my earlier days of getting involved, he was one of the people that encouraged me. So if we take anything away from his life and everything, it's, the strength of being a role model and a mentor for those who follow you, because he indeed was that. As I say, it was a pleasure to know Mark. I appreciate you for indulging me this evening and allowing me to call attention to this man who, if he were here, would humbly probably have, slinked out of the room. He wasn't interested in blowing his own horn. But I wanted to take this occasion to remember him and to thank him and to thank the community for honoring him when he passed during the last week. Again, I thank you very much for your attention, and to our good friend Mark, may he rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitehead. Mark J. Lease, 1921-2013. May you rest in peace. Our prayers and thoughts go to his family. Moving on, slightly happier topic. Next up is a proclamation honoring another extraordinary resident of the village of Riverside, Ruth Freeark. And Ms. Freeark will be honored at the Person of the Year dinner coming up on August 28th, and Mr. Gallegos from the Chamber is here and can tell us a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, I would like to read the proclamation and then ask for a vote to approve it. Ruth Freeark. Whereas Ruth Freeark, together with her husband Bob, helped found the Riverside Arts Center and donated the building in which the Riverside Arts Center and the Freeark Gallery are housed. And whereas the Riverside Arts Center and the Freeark Gallery are a center of creativity and enjoyment to the residents of the village of Riverside. And whereas Ruth Freeark is an artist, mentor, teacher, inspiration, and friend to many, and exemplifies the best of what it means to be a resident of the village of Riverside. And whereas Ruth Freeark has been named the 2013 Person of the Year by the Riverside Township Lions Club and the Riverside Chamber of Commerce. Now therefore be it resolved that we, the members of the Riverside Board of Trustees, do hereby express to Ruth Freeark our sincere congratulations and heartfelt thanks for her outstanding service and contributions to the quality of life in the village of Riverside. So I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve this.
Move to approve.
Motion by Ms. Hamilton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Ballerine. Any discussion? If you'll please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
And even though I don't get the vote unless there was a tie, I would vote yes too. So congratulations to Ms. Freeark, and I look forward to seeing her on the 28th, and I hope all of us can be there to honor her. Next up is public comment. Mr. Gallegos.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening. Good evening, trustees, those in attendance, and to those watching at home. Sir, I come before you on behalf of the Village Chamber of Commerce. It is my pleasure to inform the public of the upcoming chamber events. I really have one reminder, and that is about Person of the Year dinner, which is going to be held on August 28th, also known as Riverside Day. Tickets are available for that dinner at Arcade Jewelers, the library, and Riverside Bank for $43 per person. Cocktails are at 6, dinner is at 7, it's a cash bar, and business casual is the dress code for that. Ruth Freeark will be honored for the things that you mentioned in your proclamation, Mr. President, and I look forward to seeing all the residents and other attendees present. And that's all I have for today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to address the board before we move along? No. Hearing none, we'll move on to the reports of village officers. First up is the village president's report, and first up on that is a motion to appoint Ron Ritzler to the Parks and Recreation Board with the term to expire May 15, 2016. The trustees have received his resume. He has a vast experience in outdoor recreation and will make an excellent addition to the Parks and Recreation Board. So I'd ask for a motion and a second.
Move to accept.
Motion by Ms. Sussman, second by Ms. Collins. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Motion carries. The only other thing I have on my report is just one item of information. I did meet this morning with one of our state representatives, Silvana Tabares, and we had a very nice discussion over at Fleur. She loved the muffins, which I think everyone does. And I'm very pleased to say that pending one of our items later on in the meeting is to discuss the ITEP grant that we're preparing for the streetscape on Burlington, and she offered her full support in trying to help us get that grant approved. So we look forward to many years of her representation to our village, and it was a very nice meeting with her this morning. That's all I have. So next up is the village manager's report. Mr. Scalera.
Okay, I only have 2 items. Before I get to the one that was listed on the agenda, I wanted just to remind our residents that the Oak Park Cycle Club will be holding its 8th annual Right Ride, which will be passing through Riverside this coming Sunday, August 18th. We ask that you please be on the alert for bicyclists who will be following the Palmer route southwest on Long Common to the rest stop at the historic water tower, and then exiting the village westbound on Forest Avenue. We expect the riders to be in the village in between 6 a.m. and 4 p.m. on that date. Since this is not a race, they will be traveling at their own pace, so please use caution on Sunday, August 18th. The next item that I wanted to bring to the community's attention is an effort that the Village Building Department will be initiating in regards to code enforcement within our village. Our Community Development Department will be working with our code enforcement officer, who will be performing an inspection of the entire village, and will be issuing these green door hanger tags to any properties that have a number of violations that are indicated on this door hanger. If you do receive one of these, it will have a date in which you will have to comply with the village ordinance, and failure to do so may result in a citation being issued. So I ask that you please take note of that. We will try to get the information out via Riverside Review, our website, and eFlash. And that kind of leads to a different approach that the village is going to be taking in regard to the code enforcement. One of the things that village staff is working with our village attorneys to bring back to the board for consideration at a future meeting is our code compliance code. And we are suggesting that we make changes to the code that will bring the adjudication of these types of complaints from Maywood to the village here, where hearing officers would be listening to the violation complaints and then assessing the appropriate fines as well as time limits for resolution of any outstanding code violations. This is a change from the current practice, which the village issues a complaint to a property owner. That property owner has 30 days to comply. If the property owner fails to comply, then a notice of a violation is issued, which provides the property owner with another 30 days to come into compliance. So the goal is to shorten that period so that we can try and get a tighter control over properties that aren't meeting the village code. So I wanted to bring that to the board's attention and to alert you that we will have language before you at probably the next 2 or 3 meetings from now, asking for those changes to our code. And that is all I have, Mr. President.
With this notice to the residents for various different things, general repair, grass, things like that, I think it's also very important that the residents know that, you know, it's our attempt to make the village look better. And on that note, the village has a very dedicated staff. sometimes isn't without our own lapses. So if you see something that bothers you, weeds that are growing in our parking lot or park or whatever, that you should think that should be attended to, I would encourage you to hold us to the same degree that we're asking to hold our property owners. So if you would, call the village and make your complaint known.
I would agree. Just to add to that, this really has to do in part with our CMAP implementations that we just spoke about a few weeks ago, and one of them was to increase our maintenance review and regulation. So this is phase one of that. And as Trustee Ballerine notes, this is not only true for residents, this is true for the village as well. It is our goal to make this village sparkle. So if you see something that you think needs attention on public property, please let our village manager know. But please keep in mind that these green notices, that if you do see them on one of your properties, it really is the real thing. It's the village's notice to you that something needs to be attended to. And if you have any questions about it, you can contact our village manager or our building department. So thank you for that, Mr. Scalera. Anything else? Next up is the approval of the consent agenda. We have the approval of bills for August 15th and also the regular meeting minutes of August 1st, 2013. Does any trust need anything removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Sussman,
Second.
second by Ms. Collins. Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up are ordinances and resolutions. We have a number of items that are going to be presented tonight by our Finance Director, Ms. Francis.
The first item that's up is for first reading. It's on an ordinance amending the village code for the village of Riverside, Illinois, relative to requisition, check signing, and other related matters. I've been working with the village attorney, Michael Mars, to do a little bit of cleanup of our village code to be consistent with not only our practices, but also be consistent with what the code says our practices are. There were a couple of portions within the code as it relates to check signing that related to the treasurer and the village president and the village manager signing. The treasurer doesn't sign checks, so that was a portion that we actually eliminated from the village code. In addition to that, the portion related to requisitions, staff is recommending a change from the requisitions requirement being from $1,250 to $2,500. That amount hasn't been updated in at least 10 years. We're probably looking closer to 20 years. I tried to go back as far as I possibly could as it relates to when this portion of the code was last updated. And then also, additionally, the check signing requirement. We had changed the procurement threshold as it related to approval by the village board from $10,000 to $20,000 back in January, I believe. And to be consistent, the practice was anything that required board approval would also require the check to be signed by the village president. Since we have changed the procurement threshold to be approved by the village board, I would also recommend that the procurement threshold as it relates to check signing also be amended. And so those are the items that are outlined within this particular ordinance change. This is just a first reading on this particular item.
So this is a first reading. Do any trustees have any questions of Ms. Francis? Okay, hearing none, we can move along.
The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the village manager to execute a pledge depository agreement. And the pledge depository agreement will actually be with Bank of America if it is necessary to do so. Currently, Per the January 11th, 2011 revision of the village's investment policy, the village board authorized the treasurer to invest up to FDIC insurance limits. Any amount in excess of FDIC was to be collateralized at 105%. You will notice that actually the resolution following this is a banking resolution to switch banks. These two particular resolutions go hand in hand. We'll be switching the depository for the collateral. Bank of America will be handling it. However, they will be acting as an escrow agent for Riverside Bank if we should need to. Riverside Bank is actually Wintrust Bank. They are part of a group of approximately 15 banks. So if the village were to deposit $7.5 million, we would be covered actually under their particular charter up to that $7.5 million based on the FDIC insurance. Anything in excess of that, we would need to get collateralized. And so that's what this particular agreement is. It's not saying at this point that we would need to collateralize these particular funds, but we need to get it approved so that if the need should arise, we have it readily available so that we can do so.
So before discussion, I would ask for a motion and a second to approve a resolution authorizing the village manager to execute a pledge depository agreement with the Bank of America.
So moved.
Motion by Mr.
Second.
Pollack, second by Ms. Sussman. Any comments or discussion? Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Pollack.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton. Aye. Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Francis. Motion carries.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a resolution of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, to approve the use of Riverside Bank as the Village of Riverside's primary bank. In May of this year, the Finance Department issued a request for proposal for banking services. We received responses from Chase Bank, First American, and also Riverside Bank. Through our analysis and review of investment opportunities, fees that would be charged, and the services that we were looking at to be offered, Riverside Bank prevailed over the other ones. Not to say that the other two banks weren't competitive. However, Riverside Bank actually offered a little bit more as it relates to rate of return for our investments that we put on deposit with them. The last time a request for proposal was completed was in 2002, so we are definitely due to complete one. In addition to that, we look like we'll be saving approximately $2,000. Obviously, that amount may fluctuate. We're hopeful that also our rate of return, given the vast opportunities that they offer for investment, that we'll also see the interest that we're currently receiving on our investments will also do a little bit better than what we've seen previously in the last few years. And the action proposed is approval of the resolution of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, to approve the use of Riverside Bank as the Village of Riverside's primary bank.
I'd ask for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Hamilton.
I have a question. So this.
Let's get our second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll second it.
Second by Ms. Sussman. Sussman.
So an actual RFP went out then?
That is correct.
And then how many, because there's no real summary of it in this, how many banks responded?
There were three banks. It was First American, Riverside Bank, and Chase Bank.
Okay, all right.
And so there was criteria that was outlined. I didn't want to put all the proposals in the agenda.
I saw that.
It can get pretty hefty with the requirements of what they were required to submit. But as I had indicated, all of them were extremely competitive and right on target with one another. One of the items that I outlined in the request for proposal is whether or not they would offer basis points in excess of Illinois funds. Usually Illinois funds is pretty competitive, and that's what we hold a lot of our funds at currently. And Riverside Bank actually provided a proposal, whereas First American was unable to even offer such as that. Chase Bank offered other investment opportunities, and so that's where we were at.
That's great.
Them.
Thanks, Jessica.
Sure.
Any further questions or discussion? If you please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Pollack.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Francis. And thank you also with regard to that first reading for getting us up to date after 20 years of letting things lag a bit.
Not a problem.
And we'll be seeing more of Ms. Francis later in this show.
Yes, you will.
Next up is a resolution supporting the village's Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program grant, and I will turn that over to Mr. Scalera.
Okay. This item before you is, as President Sells indicated, a resolution supporting the village's Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program grant for streetscape unification along Burlington Street in the Village of Riverside Central Business District for an amount not to exceed $295,000. I will get the image up on the wall in a minute here, but I had provided the board with a concept plan that was put together by our engineering firm, along with consultation by staff, as well as President Sells, Public Works Director Bailey, like I said, our engineering firm, Burke Engineering, as well as input from the commission chairs of the Preservation Commission, Plan Commission, and Preservation Commission. Both Charlie Pipel, Preservation, Paul Cerner, representing the Plan Commission, and Tom Lupfer, the chair of the Economic Development Commission, who have extensive experience in sustainable infrastructure projects, helped us develop this concept plan. And I stress the word concept because that's really all it is. It was a plan that staff with the engineering firm had to come up with in order for us to derive a project cost that is a requirement of the application grant that was submitted, or will hopefully, if approved by the board this evening, will be submitted to ITEP. The grant, if awarded, would be in conjunction with our STP grant, which is going to be resurfacing Burlington from Long Common to Harlem. And this would allow the village the opportunity to address our central business district, and as well as a number of key points identified in the CMAP plan. The plan would call for new walks, new planting beds, trees, as well as possible reconfiguration of the public right-of-way that would make it a more pedestrian-friendly aisle for visitors and residents alike. So before you is a resolution in support of our grant application to the Illinois Department of Transportation ITEP program in the amount of the village's share, which is an 80-20 match grant of hoping to not to exceed $295,000. I'll get that image up again.
So while Mr. Scalera is putting the image up so the folks at home can see just a little bit more detail about this. Once our engineers began working on the plan, and this has been an extraordinary amount of work in the last about four weeks that we've really been pushing hard to get this ready. We were informed by ITEP that they required a resolution saying that we're actually willing to provide matching funds before they would even consider the grant. So that was what led to this resolution tonight. You'll see that and I want to emphasize what Mr. Scalera said about this being a concept plan. The plan that you have in front of you and the plan that's being projected is not the plan, I repeat, is not the plan that is intended to be built. The idea of this plan, the necessity of the concept plan, was to generate the numbers necessary in the grant application that will allow us to produce a product of like kind. So the actual process would be, if we were fortunate enough to be awarded the grant, there would then be extensive input from businesses, from residents, from our commissions as to the actual plan that would actually be constructed. So this is a concept only. But you can still, in terms of the overall idea, you can see the kind of things that we have in mind with the permeable pavers, the new street furniture, drinking fountains, bike racks, a new configuration of the planters, raised planter beds to alleviate a lot of the problems we've had over the years with our planters because of salt and people walking on them and opening car doors on them, that kind of thing. So this is tied directly to the surface transportation program resurfacing of Burlington that's already scheduled for 2014 from Long Common over to Harlem. And one final thing to point out with regard to the figures, you'll see in the numbers in front of you that the estimated total cost of the program is about $1,050,000, of which the local share would be about $293,000. However, of that $293,000, approximately $56,000 of that could be derived from motor fuel tax, non-home rule sales tax, and water fund monies. So the actual cost to the unassigned reserves, if this plan was to go through, is about $235,000, $240,000. So with that background, first I'll ask for a motion and second, and then we can talk about it.
So moved to accept. Thank you.
Motion by Ms. Sussman, second by Mr. Ballerine. Any discussion? Mr. Pollak?
A couple of things. First, I don't believe it's a conflict, but I should disclose that my employer is applying for an ITEP grant, which would be in competition with this grant in theory. I assume that's not a conflict. Thank you. I did want to say that it's wonderful. I mean, I really appreciate the hard work. Having been involved in ITEP grants before, I think this should be a very strong candidate. They value the connections to multimodal facilities, bicycle racks, train stations, and the sustainability aspects of it will score very well. I'm very optimistic that we may have success with this. The one thing I would like for us to consider, and I feel like it would do nothing but add to our score in the ITEP grant application, is to include the half block between Burlington and the train tracks on the east side of Long Common Road. I think that would give a more complete look. I think that half block is going to kind of look out of place now if we don't include it. I think extending it to the train tracks does nothing but increase that aspect of the review. And so I would like to see us consider that. It would add to our portion of the matching grant. But I think if we don't do it, it's a lost opportunity. And based on what I know about ITEP grants, I think it would do nothing but help us. It can't hurt us, I think.
Could you explain, for the people who are thinking $1 million for drinking fountains and bike racks is a lot, could you explain what the main part of this is, what the sidewalk is going to look like, and what the part, because I don't think you could see clearly from this. So if you could just give a little bit more explanation.
They're very nice waterfalls.
I'm sure they're nice waterfalls.
What would happen is, because of the sidewalks being permeable pavers, we did not want to go all the way to the building facades, only because water
Just for
will
a second,
trickle
when you
down.
say permeable pavers, is that the same as what's in the green parking lot right now? So it would look the same, it would match the green parking lot?
Right.
Okay.
Or very similar, but it's that material.
idea.
And then directly in front of the buildings would be a band of exposed aggregate, so it would kind of serve as the barrier. And then you would have the paver sidewalk, which would allow for water to infiltrate into the ground, and that water would then be used and redirected towards the trees that the plan suggests to be planted along Burlington. And then it does call for bump out of the sidewalk on both sides of the street. So it will cause a bit of a narrowing of the width of the street. And that is to provide a more equal vista or view of the sidewalk completely down Burlington.
And the parking lane would also be the pavers? rather than,
In the application, we are suggesting pavers for the parking lane, but that is one of the items that is not eligible under the grant program, so that would be a direct out-of-pocket cost for the village.
And with regard to what Mr. Pollack was suggesting, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that is one of the strengths of this plan is tying it with the resurfacing project that's already planned with the STP funding. So if we were to get the grant money, then, and we actually went into the design phase, the kind of thing that Mr. Pollack's talking about could be considered. I guess the only misgiving, and again, I don't want us to make the mistake into getting into plan discussions tonight, because this is just a concept to make the grant application possible. But the general thought is that Burlington and Quincy are our straight streets. Burlington and Quincy really are the two streets that comprise our central business district. Long Common and Riverside, and the continuation on Riverside Road, really are a continuation of the curvilinear street system. So my thought would be that that part should actually match the residential look, and then we would have the permeable paver look within the confines of the central business district. But again, that's something that we can discuss at a later time, pending the actual awarding of the grant itself. I just want to say that, and I emphasize this to Representative Tabaris this morning, I mean, $1 million to average people like us sounds like a lot of money. And in terms of a project like this, it isn't necessarily a lot of money. But the extraordinary impact, I mean, this would be a truly transformative moment in the history of Riverside. We would be getting a new downtown, in essence, for a village contribution of around $300,000 and a state contribution of about $750,000. So it's an extraordinary opportunity. And Burke Engineering, and especially Orion Gailey, who really spearheaded this with Burke, have done a remarkable job of putting this together in a very, very short period of time. So I'm optimistic that the board will be in support of this.
When will the decision be made? When will we hear?
The grant is due next week, and normally we would hear back probably sometime in fall.
I mean, we've actually received some conflicting information about that. Some folks say that we'll hear in fall. Other folks say that this would be likely to be part of the capital plan for the state that would be decided upon more in January. But we're talking about a fall-winter decision time frame, which is why we had to get this prepared so quickly to get it in by the August 20th deadline. Mr. Pollack?
I appreciate what you said about not getting into the plan details, and you know, I have thoughts on that, but you're absolutely right, that's for another day. But I do think that if we don't include, if we proceed as is, we have excluded our ability to consider Long Common, because I think that would be considered an expansion of the scope of the project. And they would say, no, you can't. Once the ITEP grant is awarded, you can pull back, but you can't add to it. And I think because that's new geography, from my experience, they would consider that an expansion of the scope, and they'd say, no, you didn't include that, it's not part of the grant. Peter, does that sound right to you?
Yes, you are correct in regards to that point. I guess the point that I would make is if you were to turn that corner, then the same argument can be made up at the top there, going from the village center into the residential area. And then I'm just afraid that it will just then cascade into, well, you've gone this far. You can make the argument that the other side of the track in front of the arcade building, well, that's also part of increasing pedestrian friendly or access to our railroad station. I just felt that, I think tying it to the STP grant limit, I along with Burke Engineering, as well as the the individuals from the various commissions who we met with all felt that that was the boundary that we should aim for. And one of the things that was suggested was in the plan that's being presented, it does have permeable pavers for the parking lanes. If during the design review phase that didn't seem like it would work, you could, in essence, since we've already kind of said, well, we were putting together $45,000 for that, you could then apply it towards those areas if the board chose to do that.
I mean, my personal concern, I think the real strength, I mean, you enumerated a number of strengths for this proposal, but one of the real strengths we have is tying it directly to the STP funding and the actual resurfacing of Burlington. So at this late date, since it's due on the 20th, and we need a resolution approved tonight, I would urge us to move forward with the resolution as drafted.
I would agree. I look at the plan and I think of, I don't know why, but I think of like when you drive into towns, there's always like a center where you kind of go underneath an arch and you kind of go into the main part of town, and there's always kind of the main drag, and I guess for all practical purposes, Burlington is our main drag. So segregating it out from Long Common, I think, has its it has its positives. The one thing I would like to mention, though, is the drinking fountains. When you get to that, I would sure hope you would look at the drinking fountains that we used out of Patriots Park, because that was we got that drinking fountain from Central Park in New York.
And staff actually has reached out to the National Olmsted Society that I guess oversees or believe it or not, has copyright to that fountain to seek their permission to use that design here in the downtown district.
I think we had to talk to the city of New York. I think would be
Yeah.
but
Proclamation.
On the resolution.
On the resolution, excuse
Yes.
me. Right. And I just want to say I appreciate Doug's comments, and I understand the village manager's point about tying it to the other project that's going on, and his belief that that actually creates a better opportunity for us.
excited.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Trustee Sessom.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton. Aye. Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, trustees. Next, we move on to considerations. First up is a further discussion and potential approval of the project for clearing vegetation and invasive species behind Township Hall. And I'm going to wait on Mr. Scalera after he gets everything shut down here, because he has had this past week our insurance carrier to come out and take a look at the area, and Mr. Scalera can give us an update on some of the things to consider as we move forward in our discussion tonight.
I did meet with our IRMA representative, their senior risk claims manager. It was a long title. And we walked the back area, and he agreed that it would make a very interesting path, and it would create that circular loop. But he also raised a number of concerns that he highlighted in a report that I've shared with the village board, and a number of those kind of reflected the concerns that I shared with the board at the last meeting, and that once the area is cleared and we invite people to utilize that area, that there are a number of items that would need to be addressed, and before at least I would feel comfortable allowing people to utilize the back area of both the library and the township hall. And those concerns really centered around grading, fencing requirements, and one that I didn't think of at the time, but he really pointed out, and that was lighting, and that there are a number of areas in that back where unscrupulous individuals could be lurking and waiting for people to come by and do some unthinkable things to them. So although it is an idea that I think is a very good idea, I personally would recommend to the board that further review by our village engineer to provide the village board with estimates on what it would really cost to address any grading concerns, be brought back to the board before allowing that area to be used by either walkers or runners.
So is that the only suggestion that we wait for, the cost of the grading? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I mean, as far as clearing it, I think one of the points that was raised the last time is we really don't know what we're dealing with unless we clear the vegetation. And I guess I would say, as the IRMA person said, once you clear it, you're inviting people to use it. And I said, well, we wouldn't be broadcasting it. We'd have to really evaluate it. But he from a risk management perspective, felt that you are opening the door to people utilizing that area. It's really up to the board. I mean, if the board feels that we need to clear that vegetation to really provide an assessment, we could probably tape it off to prevent people from accessing it. In speaking with the engineering firm, they felt that they could get in there and provide us with an assessment regardless of whether vegetation is there or not.
That wasn't quite my question. There were several points that were brought up by your memo and also by the risk assessor. Mm-hmm. And what I heard you say was that you would like us to wait until we hear the cost of regrading. So my question is that the only missing piece? Or am I missing what? Am I just not understanding what you said?
I mean, we would not know the cost of, if we have to provide a level surface. Right now, you can't really tell because of the amount of vegetation, but the engineering firm said that they can get in there and provide us that assessment.
I think what Gene is saying is there were some other issues, and are those of concern to you that you think that those would cause us to not want to do this project? Or was the grading the only thing that you think stands in the way of doing the project?
All of the items that I identified are my concerns that I think you really need to take into consideration.
So as a discussion right now, do we talk about the concerns? Do we ask you to tell us what the cost would be of addressing all of them? What are we?
I have not been able to.
No, I mean in the future, not right now. But I mean, I think we have to figure out where we're going with this. We certainly understand what the concerns are.
First of all, has he ever been here at night? Because the whole town is dark. He can, seriously, I read the concerns, and I would be more concerned with a heavily vegetated area, because if I was a unscrupulous individual, I would much rather be hidden in the weeds rather than out in plain sight.
But if the weeds aren't there, you're not going to be running back there.
Well, you could, but we're talking about unscrupulous individuals.
Okay.
And we also have the path already behind the library, which is grass, and it goes all the way through to the parking lot. So there's already a precedent that there's a path back there. We have Swan Pond that we don't have lights in, that there's trees and understory, and we have trees and understory around our parks. You go to Turtle Park, if there's a beautiful park in the middle and it's surrounded by bushes and trees. So
well, I guess what I would say to that is those walking surfaces are all they're not adjacent to a river wall in which people would be able to follow.
And I agree with that assessment. I do agree with that. If we do clear this out, that a fence will have to be put up along that river wall. There's no question about that. I agree with that.
And if the fence is going up, the village's hardscape ordinance would apply, and it would need to go before the various commissions for their approval or advisory review.
Can
I go
I
back
just
to my
add a
other
point of
question?
clarification first, maybe, because maybe this will help. I mean, it seems to me there are two different questions here. The first is, should we clear it out so we can make a proper evaluation of the piece of land? And then if we make a proper evaluation and we say, yes, this is something that we actually maybe could use if we did X, Y, and Z, grading, fencing, and the rest, that would be a later decision. That'd be a secondary decision. But right now, I think what we really were talking about is just clearing out the invasive species and the
That's
weeds so we can actually see what's there.
And if I could embellish that, you stole the words out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. There's two issues here. And to embellish and add to what you said, going back to our property maintenance discussion, inviting residents to let us know where we're failing, that's where I would start. I mean, that is poor property maintenance on our part. Whether we decide to put a sidewalk or pathway in there or not, we need to clean that up. So let's start there. And then come back and and I agree with Peter too, that we do need to look at the grading and the lighting and the handicap accessibility and all those issues and do it properly when we get to that point. But I see no reason not to go ahead for property maintenance alone to start cleaning it up.
And we have the opportunity to do this with volunteer
Right.
assistance.
So I do have a question, though. The fact that we've now spoken with Irma about the possibility of doing this and including clearing it out, will that at all affect our insurance going forward?
No.
Okay. Oh, well, okay. All right.
But to
Okay.
Peter's point, once it's cleared out, we can take the
Right, I
necessary steps
understand.
to mark it off.
Okay.
The only thing you need to be concerned about if you clear it out first is to make it clear that you're not inviting people back there. Because that's the thing that Irma was concerned about.
Right, and that's
Is
what I'm
that-
saying. We're clearing it out for purposes of property maintenance.
So that'll have to be, we'll
Well, and there
need
can be
to
construction signs
have it
posted
marked.
saying,
Yeah, have it marked so that then it could be
Yeah.
investigated.
Closed to the public or something like that. yeah.
And, then you could get an estimate on, well, one, whether it needs to be regraded, and then how much it would cost, what kind of fencing would be appropriate, and what kind of lighting might be appropriate, but you don't have to choose all of them.
Right. Or stairs or whatever. That's fine.
So given this is really a property maintenance kind of issue, do we just need a consensus of the board on this, or would we need a formal motion?
Well,
for
I
this?
think you should have a formal motion, because you're going to have volunteers that are going to then come under the village volunteer program, and you have insurance for that, and waivers will be signed, and so it would be appropriate, I think, to have a motion and a second to allow the clearing to go forward using the volunteer program as outlined by Peter with the documents that he provided.
So with that background, I would ask for a motion and a second.
I would make that motion.
Motion by Mr. Pollock,
And I'll second it.
second by Ms. Sussman. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
And I guess one other thing that I would ask for consideration of is we do have the volunteer labor available to us. So do we want to, I assume we want to move forward with this quickly in the next 4 weeks
Well, the weather is still
while the
with us,
weather's still
yeah.
good?
Well, I will work with Mr. Buttimer, who's coordinating that effort, to get the individuals sign all of the waivers before they begin any work.
Can't wait to see what it looks like back there. Next up, we have returning to the podium, Finance Director Francis, who is going to go through a review of the Village of Riverside 5-year financial forecast plan, and she has some budget issues for the board to consider.
As President Sells mentioned, before you is the 5-year financial forecast. In the past, prior to actually last year was the first year in which we had the 5-year financial forecast somewhat separate from the budget process. It was consolidated with that of the CIP. This year, to allow additional discussion and/or questions, we separated the capital improvement plan, the financial forecast, and then obviously future board meetings will focus then on the budget. The financial forecast, essentially as outlined, provides information as to where we are projected to be at fiscal year end and shows based on common indicators, whether it's CPI, trend information, et cetera, as to where we could potentially be in future fiscal years. This isn't to say that this is where the numbers are going to end up. It just provides us information for the future so that we can plan accordingly. Some of the items listed for the issues to consider also that are within the financial forecast are the issues to consider for fiscal year 2014. In addition to that, there is also the police pension actuarial report, which will assist us in financial planning not only for the upcoming fiscal year, but future fiscal years as well. Are there any questions as it relates to just the financial forecast in and of itself before I move on to the issues to consider for fiscal year 2014? Okay. Then I'm going to move on into the various related items as outlined in the item commentary. For the first one is what should be the tax levy rate for fiscal year 2014 for Parks and Recreation, based on the, I believe it is the state statute. Michael or Lance can correct me, or is it the village ordinance? I know that there is a range, but I cannot recall at the moment. Is it based on village ordinance or state statute?
The statute
okay.
requires
the Parks and Recreation. It provides the rate range as it is outlined within the narrative that was provided. And I do apologize, I didn't page number. Under the issues to consider, it's number 2. And there is the 0.0667 rate, which is the minimum levy. The maximum rate is 0.09. In the past, since this particular rate was discovered with the discussions about the Parks and Rec Commission, et cetera, in the past it was always the 0.0667 rate that was applied. As EAV has dropped, the levy for Parks and Recreation has dropped. So you will notice for tax levy year 2012, which is collected this year, it dropped from the prior year by approximately $40,000. If we are to use that same methodology for fiscal year 2014, tax levy year 2013, we're going to see it drop again by approximately $21,000. The question that I have for the board is, do we want to adjust the rate for the upcoming fiscal year within that range? Do we want to say we will stay within that range and do a base? For example, $250,000. Or do we want to go with the minimum rate as applied, and if Parks and Rec need assistance from general fund revenues, assist them accordingly? Because as the EAV continues to adjust itself, which you can see I provided EAV information within the materials, historically, over the past few years, it has dropped. Are we going to see a rebound as property tax values and things, as properties start to increase again in values and people start to reinvest in their homes? Absolutely. However, we're talking about getting them over that initial hurdle, so to speak, because for next year, we're looking at a significant decrease again in the levy dollars available to them.
2 questions.
Sure.
First of all, in the 1937 ordinance, it was specifically stated .0667. I mean, those numbers were in there.
Correct.
And you're saying that even though it's specifically stated .0667, we have the latitude to change that or raise that, or?
Per the information that I have that was from, I believe, 2010 from KT&J, it offers a range from .0667 to .09. And actually that is demonstrated because if you notice, for example, this was prior to me starting with the village, but in 2011, the levy was actually $266,000, whereas it should have actually been, if you were going to assess the minimum, $221,000. Now, obviously, it was based on the EAV adjusting, but because you were within that range, you were fine. It wasn't that the county was kicking it back saying, no, you cannot levy this amount. You could, but then obviously, everything else is adjusted accordingly when they do a reconciliation at the county level.
That's also true for 2012 then, right?
Yes, because obviously the EAV for a given year isn't reported until after the fact.
Right.
So everyone within the finance world will always overestimate your EAV, especially in non-home rule communities, because if you don't, you lose the potential for that levy and those tax dollars that can be collected if you underestimate your EAV. So that compounds itself over future years because you underestimated what your EAV is.
There's one extra consideration when you're looking at all this, and that is to keep in mind that the Parks and Rec levy is also part of your capped funds. So the more you go over in the rate that you levy is going to lessen the amount under the tax cap as a whole that you could get for your general fund. It's just a consideration.
I'd like to suggest that we haven't ever formally changed the rate. The estimation may have caused it sort of backwards to do that, but we've never formally changed it. I'd like to suggest that we leave the rate at what it is and then transfer money from the general fund transfer money from the general fund to Parks and Rec. I'd prefer.
I agree with Trustee Sussman. We took a detailed look at this afternoon and talked to Jessica about it. And I think that we're in a very unfortunate timing problem right now. I think it's premature to think about changing the tax rate. But if you look at the history of the EAV since 1993, and what we're seeing right now is really what hit in 2008, and it just lags. So we're coming out of this now, and if you look down at the bottom of the information that Jessica gave us, you can see that in 2013, the EAV is supposed to go up and then get a much bigger bump in 2014, 2015. So I think that what we should consider, and I do think that Parks and Rec shouldn't be just left out in the cold because of the influence of this. I think we should consider maybe giving them some help on, in this instance for 2014, and then see where it goes from that. We have never changed this rate before, and I think it bears more discussion than just changing it tonight.
And my suggestion would be that we keep Parks and Rec, rather than reducing the amount that this would lead to, keep Parks and Rec flat for 2014. I think to wait and see what the budget is going to be doesn't allow Parks and Rec the chance to really put together a budget. Mm-hmm. And I really do not want to have residents charged more for programs or to inhibit Parks and Rec's ability to develop additional programs. So my preference would be to say to Parks and Rec, according to for Peter, actually, to talk to the Parks and Rec director and say that the budget will be flat, or flat plus the consumer price index, which is what the rest of the general fund is dealing with. And I think we, as was discussed, I think we have to be very careful that because it's an overall cap, we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. We have to make sure that we have adequate funds in our general fund as well. And so that would be, and again, as Trustee Hamilton said, we spent time talking about this, and I don't want Parks and Rec to have a reduced budget, and I'd like them to know what they're working with.
Okay. My second question.
Oh shoot, that didn't answer it?
Last month, we made a change in our budgeting process that all available funds can equal, all available revenues. Now, Park and Rec had a surplus in last year. Mm-hmm. So in essence, they have a bank account that they can draw on as they go into 2014.
Yes, in technical terms, they have an assignment under the fund balance, correct.
So that assignment is in the neighborhood of
I think
40,
it's approximately 140,000.
Okay, $140,000.
We transferred over 42,000 over to the capital projects fund to fund their capital in 2013.
But they're still sitting on, I don't mean sitting on, but they still have a cushion
That's
that
correct.
they have access to draw into if they want to maintain their budget. So I look at the recreation department, and everyone knows that I feel very strongly about recreation, but they have a cushion. And as long as they're able to access that cushion, there really is no reason for us to draw from police or fire or public works or general fund in order to do that. So I would agree with everything you all say, long as they do have the capability of drawing onto that.
That's not quite what I said, though, because I said to transfer from the general fund to make
Right.
up the
Well,
difference. And you're saying something different, I thought.
I am.
Yes?
I'm saying
Yeah.
that they use the money that they have in their own fund.
As opposed to holding on to that for future capital?
Well, we can always look at them and fund their capital.
Okay, I just...
Which is maybe even a cleaner way of doing it, is we fund their capital like we do every other department.
Although
that's
that's
something to
their
think about.
assessment. I mean, you
Right.
could argue that's their assessment, so...
I agree.
I could make the argument that capital should come out of the assessment as well.
I agree.
I'm somewhere between the two of you, and hopefully I can bring you together.
Actually, you're literally between the
I'm
two.
literally between the two of you. But actually, what I was really focused on when I was reviewing this was, do we need an increase in the tax levy rate? And my answer to that, my own answer was, no, I do not think we do. And I think that you've both raised, and we talked about possibilities of how any gap can be achieved so that their program is not hurt. And I don't know that that's the focus of our discussion tonight.
So I think your answer is
Yeah.
leave it at .067.
There you
Perfect,
go.
thank you.
Number one.
One
Oh,
down.
shoot. Joe, you were actually rejecting money.
The next item, as it relates to the issues to consider for fiscal year 2014, is with regards to the police pension levy, and whether or not the board would like to see it increase to $660,319, or does the board want to adjust the rate of return to a lesser amount, which would mean that the portion of the levy related to the police pension fund would actually increase, meaning the available funds for the general corporate would decrease. Every time we tweak our rate of return by 0.25%, that means we have to increase our contribution by $30,000.
We tweaked it last year by
We tweaked it
0.20 by
3 years
20.
ago. It was 3
3
years
years ago?
Yes.
Wow.
It goes quickly when you're having fun, Joe.
It's 3 years ago that we were sitting
Yes.
upstairs and we did that.
It was with my predecessor.
I think that
I was on the board when we did that.
I think Jessica has outlined two methodologies of kind of achieving the same thing, which is making this contribution be $660,000, right?
Right now,
Yeah.
it would be either 660, staying at the rate of return of 7.75, yes.
Right. Or if you lower it, it raises the contribution. In either case, when we talk to our actuarial consultants about the amount of funding that we have in this fund, we're at 40%, and our actuarial consultant is saying, I wouldn't be anywhere near comfortable unless you were at about 60%. So we're woefully underfunded. And I think it's just fiscally irresponsible of us to not consider doing something to try and over time make up that deficit. I don't think we can wait for the state of Illinois to bail us out. They can't bail themselves out. And these are our own people working for us. And we need to take care of this ourselves here in our own village. That's my own belief.
And
What was the rate of return this year? Was it 8 point
It was
something?
slightly over, it's within the actuary report, I believe it was slightly over 8%.
Yeah, it was
However,
8.6 something.
if we look at the 5-year average rate of return, it's actually closer to 5%. So you have the years in which
Those are bad, those are bad
you have
years.
the good years, but it seems as if there are a few more bad years than good.
And I would support what Trustee Hamilton said also. I think we could try to be even more realistic and perhaps change the estimated rate of return more, but that would mean that our levy would go up even more, and I don't think that that's a sound fiscal way to approach it. But I do think we need to realize that were we to address perhaps a more accurate expected rate of return, in fact, we would be even more underfunded than Ellen said. And so I think it is important to bring that rate down.
I would also like to point out, and we'll be talking in a few minutes about the IMRF contributions. And the IMRF pension fund is a model pension fund for the state. As I mentioned earlier today, we have kind of one of the worst funds, not we, the state of Illinois, one of the worst funds and one of the best funds in the country. But IMRF, on any amounts that we don't pony up, they're charging us interest at 7.5%, which is what they're assessing is the appropriate rate of return. So I think they know a lot more collectively than at least I know, and maybe what some of the rest of us know around here. And so I would be in favor of tweaking that rate.
And what we can do is, as it relates to funding for fiscal year 2014, we can tweak the levy but keep the actuarial report as is. And if we're comfortable going forward with tweaking it, then the actuarial report for fiscal year 2014 would then have a rate of 7.5% versus 7.75.
And so that is the recommendation. We're talking about a 1/4 percentage point change for that $30,000. So do we need a motion?
So your recommendation is to reduce by a 1/4 point and then increase the levy?
Well, by reducing it, then the levy
it
automatically is
increased levy,
increased because of the actuarial
And
determination.
as you know, I've always supported an idea toward it. I really think that we should adjust the rate of investment to be more realistic. I think it's pie in the sky to keep it where it's been the last few years. So are we in agreement with moving forward in that manner?
I would leave it alone. I would leave it alone. I mean, they've had 8.6% last year. I mean, I think we're coming into. I would leave it alone.
But the issue,
I'm just one.
I think the issue though is the 40%.
Right, the issue is as a catch-up type of thing, not that it's not maybe a realistic number right now, but we need to do something to catch us up because we're so underfunded at this point that it's not really
And
a
it would
safe
be great
position.
if the rate of return were higher.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That
We're
just
not,
helps us catch up more.
we're just using it, as Trustee Hamilton said, as a method for catching up.
And also to add on to that, one of our biggest issues is in a given year, the levy doesn't even cover what we're paying out in annuities and collecting from employees as their pension contribution. So we actually have to go to the pension fund at the end of the year and tell them, you owe the village's general fund $200,000 before we can make these final annuity payments or this final 1/4 of annuity payments. And so we're actually reducing their funding level by just taking that transfer, or reducing their ability to even invest those funds because we're taking money away.
So,
Which means then they earn less.
Correct.
So with Mr. Ballerine dissenting, we have a consensus? Yes. Okay. Number 3.
The next item listed relates to something that we've already spoke to, which is the IMRF catch-up payment. Currently, as Trustee Hamilton pointed out, it compounds itself at 7.5%. There were a few years in which the village opted to take the phase-in rate versus the ARC rate, and each year thereafter, it's just continued to compound itself at the 7.5%. This year in 2013, we are actually in the annual required contribution rate. And for next fiscal year, you'll notice in the table that I provided that the rate actually decreases. One of the components obviously is investments, but also this year we did the ARC, so that's reflective in that rate. We no longer have the option of the phase-in or the ARC rate at this point because the ARC rate is the lesser of the two.
Well, I think it's foolish to pay 7.5%. That's not interest. That's juice. I find $144,000, that's ridiculous. But I thought we did this last year.
No, last year.
Yeah, I remember sitting here arguing, it was like 107, why we are paying this amount of interest.
We did argue and we lost.
But what we did last year,
Maybe that was it.
the difference, Joe, what you may remember is that we actually paid the full amount last year, whereas in the previous 3 years,
Maybe,
we hadn't
okay.
done that. But last year, we were able to pay the full amount. We just didn't pay the catch-up.
I think this will be a great feeling. I wish it was this simple to resolve the issue with the police pensions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that whole phasing thing is something best forgotten.
So there's consensus
Yeah,
on that one?
consensus. Okay.
And then what we'll do is essentially, at the end of the fiscal year, I'll authorize a catch-up payment through IMRF, and we'll go ahead and transmit the funds accordingly based on this dollar amount. But that won't occur till the end of the fiscal year, so we'll hold on to our cash a little bit longer.
Okay.
The next item is reflective of the IRMA deductible. Should the deductible for the village's liability coverage be increased? Currently, we are at $2,500. It is the question of whether or not I provided the various optional deductibles.
Where are we at right now? I'm sorry.
2,500.
Yes, 2,500, I apologize. They provide the options of 10,000 to 200,000. Some communities have elected to go to at least the first step of 10,000. Some of them are at 100,000. So it's just what's the comfort level of the village as a whole. As you can see, that if we would have elected the $10,000 level within those respective years, there would have been some years where we would have paid out, but overall, during that 5-year range that they provided, we actually would have come out ahead by approximately $29,000.
And what is your recommendation?
There's one more piece. Could you explain the excess surplus too?
Oh, absolutely. Basically, the excess surplus is a credit that's provided to the village on a given fiscal year based on IRMA's calendar. We get the option, if there are funds available, they attribute a certain portion to every IRMA community. And if you want to use it to decrease your IRMA contribution for the upcoming year, you have that option. Last year, the Village of Riverside only used a small portion. We actually have approximately $43,000 still remaining with IRMA that accrues interest based on their rate of return, which is obviously significantly higher than what we can do with our funds, since they are pooled funds. And now they've made certain policy and bylaw changes as it relates to the excess surplus. In the past, you were only able to decide, well, I want to utilize $20,000 this year, and you had to wait till the following year to then make an additional election. Now they've changed the bylaws through the Finance and Administration Committee that you have the option to ask for them to transfer that money over directly to the village's bank account, whether or not the village needs to utilize it for claims because they have a high optional deductible and they were hit with that deductible, or they need it for other funding purposes. So they're able to do it on a quarterly basis now versus an annual basis, which allows additional latitude if we do get hit. If we choose to go with the $10,000 one and we get hit with all of that claim cost within one fiscal year and we're coming in under revenue with regard to the budget, we have the option of pulling those dollars out if needed.
So your recommendation is to go to the $10,000?
At a minimum, to start out with, to figure out what our comfort level is and try to plan accordingly.
Is the $10,000 an aggregate or a per incident deductible?
Per claim.
Per claim.
And as you can see, the credits versus the losses, we would have come out ahead over that range of time. Our claims experience has gone down significantly over the past 4 years, 3.5, 4 years.
Can you tell me the difference in premium?
The difference in, well, they provide it on an annual basis. You get the credit off of your premium, but obviously that adjusts every year based on their 5-year smoothing that they provide in addition to some other various requirements under IRMA. So,
She gave us a chart.
yes. This year,
Why wouldn't we, let me just, why wouldn't one go to $25,000, if I'm looking at this, if we did a $25,000 deductible, we would have saved ourselves $70,000 over the last 6 years, correct?
Correct. It just depends on what the comfort level of the board is as a whole.
A little
With
bit like
regard to-
assessing your own
Well, I
insurance.
understand, but
Yeah.
we're a village that has, we have funds. It almost seems, I mean, if we didn't have enough money to pay insurance claims, I mean, I could see where you would be, but it almost seems like a worthwhile. I mean, $70,000. I would think we should be looking at the $25,000 or $50,000 deductible myself. Just a thought.
And when you have a $10,000 deductible, it's highly likely that if you have that one workers' comp claim, you're going to hit it within that 1 year. $25,000, usually in most instances, you're going to straddle 2 fiscal years. And you can plan accordingly and adjust accordingly. So it just depends. I wouldn't disagree with your assertion that we have the funds, and why would we not look to a slightly higher deductible to ease our pain as it relates to the contribution side, but it just depends on what the comfort level is, whether or not we want to start small the first year, because I know there was an extreme reluctance last year to even discuss this particular topic. So what the comfort level of the board is as a whole. I think we can plan and budget accordingly.
Well, I have a higher deductible on my car.
So Mr. Ballerine is comfortable with 25. What does everybody else think?
Is there an aggregate cap, or there is not any?
Not at this point in time, no.
Nothing's available.
You're talking about an aggregate cap as to what a village would pay out in a given year? No, there is not.
Depends upon.
There was discussion. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I know, I'm just wondering if there is a stop loss level. No.
There is not. There was some discussion as it relates to the $250,000 deductible level, whether or not that would be the case. They still haven't made any final decision with regard to the bylaws. It was referred back to the Finance Administration Committee.
So the steps are as described, 10,000, 25,000.
Correct. I believe for next year, they don't have the numbers yet, but they were talking about adding in a $200,000 deductible. Obviously, at the $100,000 point, you're coming close to being self-insured.
So it sounds to me like that what the board is struggling with is either 10 or 25.
Right.
So let's just go around.
It's
What
just
do
a
you
poll.
think? 10, Joe?
25.
I'd be comfortable with 25 if that was the majority
Paul?
feel.
I would probably stick with 10.
I would stick with 10.
Okay, we'll stick with
So
10.
for the next fiscal year, we'll stick with the $10,000 deductible, and then we'll revisit this again in coming years.
The next item relates to the E911 fund, which any recommendations that the village board makes has to be referred back to the 911 board for final approval, I believe. Last fiscal year, there was a decision to be made that some of the personnel costs would be shared with the 911 fund, given that they had such a healthy fund balance. They continue to have that healthy fund balance despite absorbing some of those personnel costs. And whether or not we want to increase that particular share by CPI, obviously that won't absorb all the costs that the general fund is absorbing with the upcoming fiscal year. However, it provides a little bit of a buffer, and so they're sharing in the costs as it relates to staffing the 911 center.
So another way of saying that is if we don't use the CPI adjustment, the general fund would have to pony up more for the E911
That's correct.
personnel costs.
And
I
there's a
think we should
huge cap.
increase it.
I'm sorry, there's a huge capital cost coming up in the next 2 years, next year, for equipment. And so even though there is money in the fund, the money needs to be used for this capital. And it really is about the communication center. It's not about emergency vehicles. It's not about these other things. So that's why the personnel associated with communication is a direct cost for the E911 fund. And Jessica, maybe you could take a minute just to review for all of us where the money for the E911 fund comes from.
Sure. It's a surcharge that is assessed to everyone's landline and any cell phones that are registered to Riverside addresses. So if you have a cell phone, but it's registered to your work or your office, those particular surcharges do not come to Riverside. So it's based on address, essentially, of those particular bills, and it's $1.50. We receive payments on a monthly basis from the various vendors that provide telephone services.
And it's a state statute. It's not something we can't decide it's going to be $2 now. I asked that already.
So there's agreement on
Yes.
this issue?
Yes.
Okay.
And the final item listed is the annual maintenance cost that is assessed to the parking lot fund. Similar to the E911 fund, the general fund absorbs certain costs but passes on some costs to those other extraordinary funds, parking lot fund being one of them. Any type of cost as it relates to parking permits, issuance of parking permits. My staff's time, there was essentially a formula that was figured out of what was appropriate to charge back to the parking lot fund. Historically, it's been tweaked by CPI. I just wanted to confirm that the consensus of the board was to continue to do that going forward for the upcoming fiscal year.
And that's your recommendation?
Correct.
That's fine with me.
Okay, you're scoring 100.
And that's all I have for this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Francis.
Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say that I thought Jessica did an excellent job in putting together this document. It was very helpful, very easy to go through. She's always open for questions, right?
Absolutely.
Just the kind of high-quality work we always seem to get from her.
I would just like, in the future, if you're going to reference Rob Peter to pay Paul, you reverse the names. I'm always getting Rob to pay Paul, so I don't like that.
We just need a Paul on the board and we're all set.
So next up is a review of the Molly's Public House outdoor cafe hours. If you'll recall, back in June, we extended Molly's outdoor cafe hours to 11 o'clock, and then we put tonight as a chance for us to revisit that to see if there had been any problems. I spoke with Chief Weitzel before the meeting. There have been 0 complaints of any kind coming forward with regard to the extension of the hours. And I would also point out that in the very near future, the Plan Commission is going to be considering the whole idea of special and permitted uses with regard to outdoor cafe hours. So my personal suggestion would be that we allow this to stand pending review by the Plan Commission and their recommendation to the board.
I guess my only question would be, given the fact that there's not much time this year left for Molly's to even have additional hours, might we want to consider giving them to them on a trial basis just until the end of this outdoor eating season? I mean, they're not going to be using outdoor hours in November.
I guess that's what I thought I just said.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I thought you said table it until you hear back from the Plan Commission.
No, to extend their hours until we...
Okay, I thought you meant exend discussion of
I
this.
wasn't clear.
Sorry.
No, I mean to leave it the way it is. Let them
I'm for it, Ben.
keep the outdoor hours.
Let's
Sorry.
do it.
I'm glad somebody's paying attention. You okay with that? Okay.
Great.
So next up is a discussion of the first and second reading process for ordinances. Mr. Ballinger, you wanted to discuss this?
And if we go forward with this, I would like to waive the first reading of it. Actually, it was reminded to me by Doug when he said, when we discussed this last time, is, you know, if we're going to do this, we really should have a discussion about it, and I think we really should have a discussion about it. You know, if we look back over the last 3.5 years or 3 years that this has been in place, I've only really seen it come into, you know, effect twice, where the public has actually come up and wanted to discuss something. And they were big issues. One was the Park and Rec Board, and the other one was, I think, the dam. And I think any time we have those type of issues, any trustee is obviously going to think long and think hard and give everyone as much time as they need to voice their opinions. Other than that, I just think it's just another way government makes things longer. If you think about, I mean, I could just think about Minuteman. You say, it's only, we discussed that sign, it went to the Plan Commission, comes back to the board for consideration, then goes to a first reading, and then we have to have a first reading, then a second reading. In the meantime, he still doesn't have a sign up because it takes so long to order these things. And how much business is he missing because he doesn't have his digital sign up? We don't know that answer. But, I would assume he's missing something. How many man hours is he utilizing to change it by hand where he could be doing it, by controls? And even Deborah with the fence. To you and to me, it may be, whether her fence gets up 2 weeks earlier or not doesn't make a difference. But you know what? This thing has been discussed to nauseam here at in the Plan Commission and the Zoning Board, here at the board. Then we get to the first reading, and then we say, well, you know what? We're going to wait for the second reading. It just seems to me like it's a good idea, and I understand why it was done. I just don't see. I think history will tell us that a respectful board that is respectful of its residents really knows when things are contentious and things need to be discussed, and will take their time and do their due diligence. But for 99% of the stuff, it's just a waste of time.
Mr. Pollock?
I agree. And I think that, especially the last part of your statement, we're going to respect the residents, the business owners. If they need more time on a contentious issue, a difficult issue, or if any single trustee needs more time to consider new information or whatever, we'll do that. But I think the fallback should be expedited, get it done, especially those cases that have spent time at the Plan Commission or the Zoning Board or another advisory body, and they've hashed it out and made their recommendation. It comes to us, let's get it done.
Then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what is the history on this? Was this just put in recently, or has this always been this way?
And I was actually going to talk about that. The reason it was put in prior to the previous board, the way the meetings were structured was that every other meeting there was something called a committee of the whole, and that before the actual board meeting, and that was used as a time to discuss issues, to discuss ideas, to discuss perhaps a ordinance that was coming up that hadn't been quite drafted yet. And when the previous board came in, the determination, and that was a meeting that was only where discussion was limited to trustees. And when the most recent board came in, that was changed to have 2 readings and to have open sessions on those 2 readings. So that was why. And I actually understand what Doug and Joe are saying, that there are instances where perhaps it's overkill. But I think what they're talking about are the outliers on that, where it has gone to a Plan Commission, where it has been in the Zoning Board of Appeals. The ones where we actually have a smooth process where an ordinance comes up, we talk about it, we say, okay, we're going to wait because we've never talked about it before, we've never opened it up to the public, we've never talked about it among ourselves. So while it's true that one of the reasons is to allow the public to comment, the other reason is that we do not have opportunities to talk about these things and to hear from each other unless we're actually in this room. We cannot have a little mini meeting to talk about a proposed ordinance. So I don't want to eliminate the benefit of our discussions by looking at only the contentious issues or the ones that are the outliers. If we want to draft something that says, when it's been discussed by the Plan Commission, when the minutes are available, same thing say for zoning or for preservation or whatever, then in that case, perhaps, we would just have one hearing, one discussion, that's fine. But I think that it's detrimental to the village and certainly to us as a deliberative body to not have an opportunity to think about something new, to go home, talk to on a one-on-one, or to talk to our neighbors, and to provide input on what that ordinance is going to be. To eliminate that automatically, I think, is detrimental to the village. As I said, I am willing to think about the Plan Commission or the Zoning Commission or any other commission that's gone and looked at this already, and we have the ability to look at their deliberation. But in many instances, we don't. It's up to us, and I don't think it's a good idea to eliminate the second reading in those cases, particularly.
See, I would, and I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but I would say that now is our deliberation. And when we come back in 2 weeks with an ordinance that says should we waive the first reading, we've already discussed it. We're having that deliberation right now.
That's fine, but in many instances, we are given an ordinance and we haven't talked about it beforehand.
And then maybe that's the middle ground. If the ordinance comes before us for the first time with no discussion at the board level, then maybe we should have 2 readings. And I don't disagree with that. But if an ordinance comes out of discussion, either from a commission or from this board, like tonight would be a great example, there should be no reason why this ordinance cannot be passed at the next board meeting, because we've had a very good, long, lengthy, intelligent discussion about it. And I don't know if I'd go home, and I may go home, and my wife may have an opinion that may change my mind. But I doubt it, because she's not watching tonight. But I'm just saying, but there could be a neighbor that says, you know what, Joe, you should have thought of this, or blah, 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 blah. And I see where that comes from, but in this case, we have discussed it. So now we're having actually a third reading.
Right, we're not talking about this case, we're talking about the overall process. We're not talking about that specific fence thing, we're talking about the overall process, Joe.
But you're saying commissions, okay, you'd be willing to waive the first reading on things that had commissions, or plan commission, zoning board commission, any kind of commission. I would also include anything that has had previous discussion at a board level. And that's all. And then if an ordinance comes before us that we have not discussed before until that night, yeah, I can understand where I can see that. Yeah, that could.
Then maybe we should return to a committee of the whole.
And that's.
I was going to say, instead of having it where it's always 2 and we waive the first reading, could we instead have that it's always 1, but we request a second reading? So if something comes up and any of us don't feel comfortable doing it on the first one, then we request that there be a second reading of this one.
Let me address a couple things, because I've kind of been a part of the history of this too. The committee of the whole process really was designed to be a situation where the trustees could speak more informally about things with regard to issues, whether they wanted to direct our village attorneys to draft into ordinance or something like that. When the new board took office and we revised our agenda format, the goal of Mr. Sclair and I in choosing the format that we're now using with regard to the considerations was to try to capture the best of both worlds. Because if you'll remember, the committee of the whole was a cumbersome process, because we actually had 2 meetings in a night. We would have the committee of the whole meeting, we would then adjourn and then reconvene in a regular meeting in order to take care of business. The current process, the whole idea of considerations is to allow exactly the kind of quasi-informal discussion that you're talking about. Another thing that has happened is the various commissions have been informed that they no longer are able to generate attorney work product. All attorney requests now have to go through our village manager. So we're not going to be getting ordinances coming from the commissions that have not gone through our village manager and that have appeared before that under considerations. Now, it may be like tonight, in the past, the commissions have generated ordinances on their own. That's not going to happen now, because Mr. Scalera is in charge. He's the gatekeeper of the attorney's fees. Because in the past, we've had a lot of attorney's fees generated by a commission saying, look into this, look into that, let's draft a sample ordinance. That's not happening anymore. So if a commission has a desire for an ordinance, it's going to come here under considerations before the attorneys are given a
I
direction
understand.
to actually draft that ordinance. So we're going to get a first bite at it the way Mr. Ballerine is discussing. So that's going to happen in any event. And then to come back to Ms. Collins' point, Roberts already has a method of doing exactly what you were just saying. If it comes up, if an ordinance comes before us and we decide for whatever reason that we need more time, we simply table it until the next meeting.
And by doing that, do we have to actually vote, or could the minority say, I need more time, and we would respect that, or we would, excuse me, Richard? Thank you. Could we, you know what I mean? I would hate to put people who
I mean, a motion to table does require a
Right now,
majority.
under your rules now, you would need a majority to get to it now by waiving the first reading, because there's
Right.
a two-reading requirement. Without a two-reading requirement, under the basic rules of board procedure, you would need a majority of you that want to table it.
So if there were a couple of people who were still uncomfortable or undecided, and they were in the minority, they would not be tabled.
Right, I mean, unless the majority, although they were confident, respected the desire of the minority to have more time,
But
which is usually fairly common, I think, but you have to
Well, maybe
need a
not.
level of trust among yourselves. But I mean, that's fairly common, unless there's a perception that there's some kind of an emergency by the majority to get something done. But
Okay.
technically, you would need a majority to table it, yes, legally.
So since we're talking procedure and technicalities, if the board wanted to do away with this and actually go to a regular hearing of an ordinance with the potential of tabling or whatever, is that something that we would need to put on a later agenda?
Well, because
Since
until
it
it's
just
enacted,
says
you have
discussion.
a two-reading requirement, yeah.
Okay. But since this is a discussion tonight, if there's a consensus to do this, do we have the authority tonight to ask you to draft such an ordinance to bring back to us for a first
sure.
reading at the next?
Sure, yeah.
So
yeah,
is there
absolutely.
a consensus that we would like to
We're
do
going to
this?
have at least 2 more discussions.
Yes, we're going to have at least 2 more
Well, not
discussions
necessarily,
about
because
whether
the
we should
majority
have
of you
one
might want to
discussion.
waive the second reading once it comes before you, which you could do.
Kierkegaard just rolled over in his grave.
I just want to be very clear that I'm in favor of changing it for the commissions and for changing it when we have a thorough discussion here, but I'm not in favor of changing it so that people so that we have to vote to have a second reading. I would prefer that we vote not to have a second reading so that there's greater respect for people who might still be uncertain or need more information or who are in the minority. I think it puts the onus on the minority that way, and I don't really think that's fair. So my preference would be that we waive the second reading rather than majority assume that we don't need it.
Mr. Pollack, did you have something?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is I think that we will, at least I can speak for myself, if there's 2 people who say they need more time on an issue, I will almost for sure every time agree to table it.
Almost for sure. That's my point. I'm serious.
Well,
That's my point.
I know, but you know, I never say never, so that's why I'm not being committal. But I do think that if one person says they need more time and they have a legitimate reason for it, I'm going to say give them more time.
Almost for certain.
So you would like
No, for certain, if with the caveat that they have.
So we can move on.
I agree with their
Let's
reason,
move
but
along here. So you would be in favor
I
of
would be in
actually
favor,
considering
yeah.
this as an ordinance? Ms. Hamilton?
Yes, I'm in favor of considering it as an ordinance.
Okay, so we would ask our attorneys to bring something back to us.
Could I just ask one more question? You mentioned that when something comes from the zoning board or the planning commission or other committees, that we won't have an ordinance. So it will be essentially 2 meetings
No,
to approve it.
If it's like for a variation or something, the draft ordinance would be there when it comes to you.
So
Yeah.
the first time we see
That would
it,
be
we
your
have the
first
option
reading.
of finishing it,
Yes.
of approving. Okay, good. I misunderstood that.
Okay. So the last thing under considerations is not listed, but it's something that Attorney Mars reminded me about earlier this morning. At our last meeting, he gave a report about the review of the special and permitted use analysis that the Plan Commission is working on. Another thing that the Plan Commission has asked for our input on is the idea of combining the Plan Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals. So what I'm asking is not whether you want to combine the Plan Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals, but what the Plan Commission would like to know is, are we open to this discussion? Because if we're not, then it's going to short circuit what they're going to do. If we are, they are going to look at this in more depth and provide us some more in-depth recommendations. So is this something that we, or at least we're
I think we made
considering?
a commitment coming in to look at everything
look
that
at it.
could make for a more efficient form of doing business here, so yeah.
Is that what they need, Mr. Morris? Okay. Any other new business? Okay, we do have a need for an executive session this evening. No action will be taken during this executive session. Is for a discussion of pending litigation. We will not reconvene. So I'd ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session, not to reconvene.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Hamilton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Ballerine. Please call the roll.
Trustee Sessom.
Aye.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned.